people use quite a lot. And I mean, I do use them, but perhaps not for what they are kind of used for on the whole. So my name is Matt. I previously worked at NI, did a bit of teaching, probably a bit like this. I actually think I did some of the virtual ones as well. So hopefully I can still remember how to do some of the demos as well as we go through it. I work on my own, so as a solo developer at Crown, and we make cans. I'm not going to bore you with all the different types of cans, but yeah, that is kind of what we do. So kind of for this presentation, I wanted to go through the objectives, really kind of what I wanted people to get out of it. And having gone to a few of these, I kind of noticed that my priorities change as I got better at LabVIEW, or better-ish, or more proficient, if you like. And I wanted basically to kind of have a bit for everyone in terms of looking at how they can you can look at the whole like cycle from requirements all the way to building something, and how you kind of go about planning those, but also looking at actual LabVIEW, seeing some code and seeing some demos. So that's kind of why I put that in there. So a bit of fake news. So it is kind of a specific title to a non-specific presentation. So I basically want to go through some of the requirements I had for something. I think I mentioned maybe tab controls once or twice, but we'll go through that. Jargon free. So I've kind of put an asterisk there. I've been to a lot of these things where people kind of go off and they waffle on about inheritance and lots of class-based stuff. I'm trying to wind you up, by the way. I do talk about classes, but there's people go through it and they use a lot of these words. Part of the reason I won't use them is because I don't really know them, but also because I think I get confused listening to a lot of people speak. Luckily, I didn't in yours, Ingram, so don't worry too much. Preferably, people will learn as well. Maybe promote some discussion, heaven forbid, and add some lists. So I have a list that sits next to me of things to go try. Quite often, I strike off that list without actually doing them, but maybe I'll make it onto there and you'll try it out. So I put this thing in. This is on some slides, basically to remind me to ask you for your input. So if it's there, it'd be great if you could kind of put in the chat or have a discussion amongst yourselves as I'm kind of presenting or raise something. I've got a bit to get through, so I don't know if it's worth actually saying anything or if Chris could do a bit of looking over the chat itself. So yeah. So a bit of the agenda. So really I'll be looking at kind of the project background. So what the project was that I had, and what the requirements are. There are many requirements to it, so I just picked a few out that kind of stood out that were perhaps a little bit different to ones I'd seen before, and hopefully different to ones other people had seen before, and how I go about approaching them. Design, development, and discussion. And I put the agile circle in there because I think going back to what Ingram was saying is that you kind of go around in circles, and as much as you try and define requirements, they do change as you go through it. So a bit of project background. So the team that I work within basically works within the business as a company within the business. So we basically provide solutions that the factories, the people that create cans, pay for. Obviously, it's not for profit, otherwise that'd be pretty pointless. But that's kind of the background behind this. So we are looking for cost-effective solutions. So ways to go about things that might not be the I won't say the best way, but it might not always be the first thing that jumps out to you. Doesn't mean we don't use compact Rios, DAX, things like that, but we do have things like, in this particular case, we're using UDP to actually have a third party create a board that does something for a little bit cheaper than your modular NI instruments. And also we do a lot of integration, so flexibility and being able to kind of add things to it and broaden what it is being used for is quite important. So, and this particular system that I'll be doing is a PC-based system. Will go in the factory for long term. Obviously, they don't technically, well, very often go hand in hand, if you like. They are relatively flexible, but it is a monitoring solution. So it's just looking at some data and feeding that back to an operator that's doing a certain thing on the line at the time as they're making their cans, or in this case, it would be decorating the cans. So Well, as I said, there are kind of a lot of requirements that went into it, but the ones that I wanted to touch on that were kind of user interface oriented was the ability to have the multiple pages. And the reason I've kind of put this in is that I've seen it done a lot of ways, from people doing work for us, people that did the work before me, the way I do it, and the way that people should do it or shouldn't do it. How you deal with different monitors, kind of leading into the multi-page flexibility. So how you can have different monitors, whether that's other PCs, 2 monitors, do you need 2 applications, and their touchscreen as well. Scalability. I think everyone probably has an idea of how you do this, and there is a learning curve with it, but we'll kind of go into how I make things scalable, and bash my head against the table many times trying to do it. And also how you can kind of have a real-time configurable layout, and how you go about basically altering what's on the screen in front of you kind of during real time, which will make more sense perhaps when I go through it. And the last one, which I hope we get onto if we have the time, because I do have some demos I wanted to go through as well, is localization, which there was a toolkit released recently, but it's paid for, so I made my own. And I think it's just it's basically, there's a methodology that I use that hopefully people can take away or have an idea of. Hopefully I'll get to do the demo, but I do talk about the kind of how you find things in order to do it as well. So I was going to go through the demonstration first. So can you all see, can someone give me a thumbs up if they can see that? Yeah, perfect. So it will look a little bit different, similar to the challenge that I did for the challenge 2. So I just have a launcher in my project, and this has got a splash screen that comes up, and it's nicely gone onto the other screen. This is kind of one of our the things that went out, if you like. I've obviously changed the colours and bits and bobs, but the screen itself. So I've had it launch. It's launched at the screen. That could be 1 or 2 screens. So I say that there could be n screens. I have a way to configure that it can launch n different versions of that, and snap those to the different monitors that you have available. And it will have, if you have only 1 monitor available, it will only do that if you set it to 2, for example. I have the ability to navigate between them. So if you look at this application itself, you have like the top bar, which I call the status bar, and then you have your tray down the bottom, and then you have a way to basically navigate between different screens and change what's visible as you go through it. You can obviously interact with these down the bottom. I also have the ability to enable and disable some of these at the top right, so I can't actually click on that at the moment. But if I was to open a dialog, which again is on the other screen, and just log into that, I can then have access. So you'll notice that I've now logged in to my user interface down the bottom, and which shows the king, because I'm the admin. And then you can then select different screens from that sort of idea as well. All these buttons down the bottom do show dialogues, which all open up on a different screen, which I can't drag around, so I can't show that at the moment. But they're just popping up dialogues in the middle of the screen, similar to, I don't know, your 1-button dialogue, if you like, or something along those lines. One of the things I did want to show is that going back to the password entry. So when I logged out and I entered this thing down the bottom here, this opens a dialog for password entry. So that's something that you have to take into account whenever you're going to have multiple screens. So how do you deal with multiple people being able to log into the same application, if you like, at the same time, and how do you go about doing that? And the other thing that I wanted to show is on this first screen, the ability to basically pop out bigger things, have different numbers of different things. So as well as when I can log in, I can actually configure what I can show, which again you can't see because it's on the other screen. So maybe I should actually just swap over. So I'll do that. Wrong thing. How do I do that? Screen 1. So I think you should be able to see that now. move across. No, it's not working. Brilliant. I will start that again. Can you now see that on the other screen? Yeah, okay. So if I minimize, bring that over there. So what I wanted to quickly show there is that how you can basically configure it. So this is my dialogues that are now popping up on the right screen. So I have basically a dialog that comes up, and you can configure what number you want to be able to see. So you'll notice all the values, or these pictures, if you like, they have different numbers in them. I can change what numbers, I can change how many show up, so that you only have two or three or four or whatever. You can pop those out, change which ones show up again, even have only one. And the reason for this was that we have multiple monitors that are at different places on something that's about the size of a double-decker bus. So basically you can then have different things visualized to different users or operators at any one time. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to with the demonstration on that. Is there any questions before I kind of move on from there?
Yeah, I have a question, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How are these monitors linked? Are they connected to one PC, or are they connected?
Yeah, so that's I will go into that. So that was kind of something we had to consider from a cost benefit side, as well as how they're done. So that these monitors would be linked just to one PC, running running one application that runs two different user interfaces, which I'll go into the reasons of as we kind of go through the presentation. So I'll go actually close that, bring that across there. So this is something that often people have to do, and I don't know. Can I? Oh, I've done the opposite thing now. Can you? It's seeing the wrong one, isn't it? All right, I'll change the screen again. Can you see both my screens? No.
No,
okay.
just see one. The way to fix this for your LabVIEW stuff, by the way, Matt, is just to set the default monitor. So you know you've got like a primary monitor, a secondary monitor, and Windows. So in LabVIEw, you specify one to be the other one fixes it.
You'll see why later, because I specified two.
All right. Okay.
So it gets a bit annoying, but so I will go back to. Which one can you see any screen now?
We can see one with the MLOG logo in the middle.
With the what? Sorry.
The MLOG logo and Windows Explorer with the presentation.
Yeah, File Explorer.
Yeah.
File Explorer.
Okay. Right. So you can't see anything.
Now we can see. Well, we can see PowerPoint now, but it's obviously the full version of PowerPoint, not the presentation.
Right. You can see it now, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm getting confused.
Now we can. Yeah, now we can see presenter view though.
Oh my god.
You can just switch at the top, right?
Okay,
there's
that's
a button.
fine.
See display settings at the top. You can just do switch presenter view.
Which one's that? Sorry.
So see at the very top of presenter view, there's a thing that says show taskbar, display settings, and end slideshow. If you go to display settings one, you can flip presenter view in the other view, and then that'll fix it.
So I can't see presenter view.
Well, then I can't help you.
Yeah, one second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Right.
Nice picture, Ian. Is that from Tiger King?
Right. Can you now see the right one?
What's the right one?
Just the normal presentation.
Yeah, I can see a multi-page. Yeah.
Yes, cool. Right. Okay, so this is one of those things that I think people found different ways to do, and I put in that thing there to kind of get people's ideas about how they'd go about doing it. So there are how can you basically expand the functionality of basically how many screens can you view? So that these are the things I was kind of taking into account. So if I wanted 1 screen, 2 screens, 3 screens, end screens, basically that sit within one application. So I'm going to use screens and monitors slightly differently. So screens are the things that sit inside my framework. So they are what sits down inside this white area. So you might want n different screens for each different monitor, if you like. And that way, how do you configure how that's done? Which is easy, but also abstracted so that you can add it quickly, but also if I mean, it doesn't apply because I work on my own, but if someone wanted to come along and basically put more screens in, how would they go about doing that really easily? But also, how do you avoid duplication? So how do you go about making it so that you don't have to have 2 different screens that go into the same place, copy and paste everything all the time, and then once you've change one, you have to kind of go back and change another as you go back through that. So I don't know if anybody had any ideas about how they'd go about doing that. You can put it in the chat or whatever, and go through that. So some of the ideas or some of the things I've seen, these are not all of them, I'm sure, or maybe they are, I don't know. But some of the things I've kind of gone through and seen people do is they've done page ordering. So what they'll do is they'll have basically the same thing, copy and pasted, and then change what it visually looks like. So you have the same control, the same type def at the top, the same banner, the same tray, and basically have the same one, and then have basically a function that changes the order of those pages as they are shown. It's scalable. It's scalable in that you can have as many as you want. You just need the references to those VIs, and they're just separate VIs that you can change. But I think personally, I don't know, I've come to modify these, and I find them ugly. They're quite hard to use, especially if you don't know kind of what goes where. And you do end up doing duplication. So, I mean, you have the same taskbar, you have to show the data twice more times. And if you wanted to change, for example, say a taskbar that had some data on it, you'd have to go through and change every single one as you go through it. So that's kind of the first one that I've seen used. So the other one that's the reference to tab controls. This is one that people do quite often, is they'll have a tab control which is basically done, and you can basically change that as you press different buttons. It's quite easy to use. You're kind of familiar with it, but there's no real abstraction to it, which makes it quite easy to use. The one thing I would say as well is that when you kind of bring these in, is that you do, again, a bit of duplication, but also you no longer can get scalability out of it. I mean, you can scale tab controls, but when it comes to actually splitting up those tab controls and with things like panes, which I go on to very briefly later, because there are many presentations on that, it becomes quite difficult to use. And it's also one VI, so you're loading in everything at the same time. You're not dynamically launching everything, and it can be quite a big VI to I've seen that before in my life, but big VI to kind of upload and compile. And then the other one, which is one that I use, and I think a lot of people have started to use, and there are actually tools that I've again haven't really done the due diligence on and had a quick look over, but things like MGI's panel toolkit, and then there's I think there's somebody that did one recently called Pane Relief, which I haven't looked into, but they do exist, and they use things like subpanels and make it a little bit easier to use, because they are scalable, they are flexible, you can change a lot of things about them. You can dynamically load things in, you can change what's in them as you kind of go through it, and that's how I got that kind of pop out effect. But there is definitely a learning curve, especially if you're trying to make them scalable. So you do have to manage them, and that's why the asterisk was there for the MGI Panels Manager, and it does increase the complexity. I think a lot of people put off from doing it because it can be quite difficult to manage and get your head around to start with, but I think that they are very useful, and something that I would very heavily endorse. Plus one for the MGI Panels Manager. I did look at that, and perhaps something that I've created is pretty similar. But like, I don't know if anybody else feels the same, but anything that I kind of use, I kind of tear apart first to make sure I know how it works. So then again, so this is how I was going to look at how you do different monitors displays. And again, I wanted to kind of get people's input, perhaps at this point, and whether that's on the chat. So how do you really get things that go on different monitors? So I think that was leading back to your question, Craig, as well. Is that how do you go about how you you basically have different monitors. Do you have separate PCs? Do you have separate applications? Do you look at master and slaves? So how do you configure separate screens as well? Do you have separate configuration for each individual one? Also, is it going to be touchscreen? So that often changes the size of different things. How do you manage data? So if you've got data coming in this case, it's as a UDP string, so you could quite easily have two applications that take in the same string and go about it that way. Again, how do you have access rights? So if you're going to be doing configuration or commissioning, for example, from one of them, you make sure you don't want to make you want to make sure that no one else is doing exactly the same thing from the other screen. So how do you go about do that and monitoring that sort of thing? And also, one of our major considerations, and I kind of alluded to, is cost. So if you're going to have multiple monitors, are they just monitors or are they PCs? And you kind of talk to those and communicate between them, whether that's TCP or whatever, over a network or kind of however you want to go about it. So I kind of put some options together. It was quite wordy, so I tried to put some pictures in. So the option one is that you have basically two PCs, and then you have the same application on both. It's a relatively dumb application. You're just receiving in those strings, but it does make for kind of easier UI development. You don't really have to do any management. You're just getting data in. I put it as an option, but really it wasn't an option for us because we had to do some commissioning. But that is one way that people might go about it. I've tried to color code the disadvantages. Things that I don't like are in purple, and things in red I think my manager doesn't like. And unsurprisingly, cost is the things that they don't like. But the second option is that you have two different applications that talk to each other on two separate PCs. You can then have a common configuration that you communicate between the two. You might have like easier UI development in terms of the UI side, but you still under the hood likely have to have something that's master and slave so that you can work between them. Feel free to chip in if you kind of haven't looked into these, but yeah, or have an idea about these. The other one would be to have two separate applications on the same PC. Perhaps that isn't a solution really, but it's lowering the cost in the sense that you have two applications on one PC again, but you do have development time to kind of create the two. And the one that I opted for is the one application on the one PC, but with two separate displays. It's only one application to maintain, no master slave setup, common configuration. You're not duplicating data, but it does, and I did find this when I was doing it, is that you do have to think about the development a little bit more and perhaps even plan it, which is a crazy thought, I know.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, it's like a robot.
Sorry.
Can anybody else hear that? Is it just me?
Yeah, that's. I can't. Do you want to put it, Matt? Do you want to put it in the Matt Jones? Do you want to put it in the chat? Or
Yeah.
Simon G's put a comment in the chat there, Matt, about single point of failure.
So I'm guessing in terms of well, I guess that depends on how critical the application is. So I think going back to what we were talking about, this is a monitoring solution, and it's not doing any control. So I would agree it doesn't really have any fail safes. So obviously, when you get the data in, it's maintained in one place. But I think in the same way that when you were to, I don't know, build any application, if you like that's PC based or along those lines, you don't tend to have 2 points of failure for those. So it's similar to that, I guess. It's not a critical application. Is that I hope that's what you kind of alluded to. But it's a good point. It's definitely a good point. So I was going to move on there. Is that okay? Brilliant. So the next part is that I do, going back to kind of the snipe I had, if you like, in which then again I go on to use. This was all class based, so hopefully it doesn't go over too many people's heads in terms of if you don't use them. But this is.
You're going to describe the actor framework without using
I'm
jargon.
absolutely
I'll
not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not going to do that. So the first thing I've done is scrub out the word actor, is because I think that although it applies, Matt, I'll come back to that because that was something that we thought about. Unfortunately, we don't have web access in our plans, but yeah, I agree. So the module, I've scribbled out actor because it's one of those things that I think people see and they cry away from, because it's a bit, it's shrouded in this kind of mist of elite, if you like. It's definitely not. It's not a particularly difficult concept to gather when you have basically a little bit of look at actor in general. So I actually created, it was never really the intention, but I actually created my own actor variation, because there are a few reasons, but because I wanted to be able to cascade messages, and I didn't know how to do it originally without the framework, which I do now. You just change something in it. But remove duplication. So one of the reasons that you want to use classes is that you can basically have one user interface that you can duplicate those things. It's good for a user interface, I find, in terms of dynamically dispatching things. And actually, the main reason I kind of went down an actor approach really is that I kind of wanted to learn actor framework, and I don't really like using things that I don't know how they work. So I actually tore the thing apart and basically built my own. I've done the same with the DQMH as well, and got down those tracks. I'm not saying that they have the same fully fledged scripting tools and things like that with all of those, but I can safely say that I know how those work a lot better than I did before, as we go through it. But so I just have outlined some parts to it. So the requests, going back to a queued message handler, this I kind of wanted to relate it to it, is that so in a queued message handler, your messenger is basically a string and some variant, which is again going the opposite of what Ingram was saying in terms of using a class. But yeah, the idea here is that I've stuck with that. You've got a message as a string and a variant as your data, and you can send requests basically up or down a tree, but that tree doesn't matter for this point. You can basically send data to and from things, or make requests. You can launch these. So this is probably the most difficult concept if you haven't looked at is starting asynchronous calls. I pretty much still use the LabVIEW help example, because it's a nice way to just load it up and use it. And I actually used it during my CLA just to kind of to basically dynamically launch things. The start asynchronous call is basically the way to dynamically launch things that's not statically on your block diagram, if you've not come across that before. And then I just kind of have placed in the main VI from the QMH template that you get with LabVIEW. So if you're looking at that, so the core in my case is basically a event loop and a message handling loop, but I don't have to have the event loop. You can basically just have a message handling loop in there, and then I've basically wrapped up a message handler or the case structure into one VI, so that you can't make visualizations from inside the message handling loop of a QMH. And that's all I'm doing really. There's nothing kind of crazy about this, apart from the fact that a lot of people look at classes and go, oh, no, thank you. So that's kind of the overview of that. Is that have I lost anybody there?
So how do you manage your Q references?
So because it's have you used Actor at all?
I've used the actor framework a bit, yeah.
Yeah, so it's in a similar way. The Q references will either be automatically stopped by the caller, and then again similarly you have the ability to send yourself a request or a message, a caller request, and a launched or nested a request as well.
Okay.
So they're automatically stopped at the end as well, through the queues. They're at the moment they're in a class, because I like having things in classes just in case I need to do a little bit of something extra with them. But they could be you could have them in a queue or whichever. But yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
So your message handling loop, is this illustrative, I guess, of is this what you're doing? And you have your your string variant message for managing internal messages within your screen or module, and then you have an external queue for passing things up and down.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have you're in queuers, if you like, from out the framework.
Okay.
Yeah. But the main difference, if you like, is that I actually still have a case structure that I can.
Yeah.
Basically, I designed it. If I wanted to give it to someone, that the new QMH, it would look familiar, because
Sure.
I think the command pattern is the most difficult part about Active Framework to get your head around as you go through it. Okay.
Thank you.
So a bit of UML as well. I don't really like UML for showing things because people just look at it and go, what does that mean? And I use it for documentation very similarly to Ingram kind of alluded to. So you've got the top, you've got your actor. I stick an error handler between so that all my error handling is done basically within each actor instead of kind of having one module that does it. And then we get on to what our user interface. So the user interface, it has a monitor and a panel reference. So the panel that it's within. Now that basically we then have the ability to insert any user interface into any subpanel. And then from there you can inherit things like managers, which you could have a manager. In this case, I've brought in something that can have a lot of screens, and then you can manage between them. So similarly, how I was flicking between my different screens, you have an array of different types of screen that you can change between. And also the ability to launch screens, whether that's dynamically, so you can launch it every time you change screen, or you statically launch them, then just load those user interfaces into your manager. And then there are a couple of other things that I talk about as well, which are containers, which are very simple managers in that they launch a specific or some screens into them, and then at the lower level of a container you have just one screen. That's how I got that array pattern. So you can change the different containers that you have, and then different widgets, essentially, or basically using buzz terms from other development, but different ways, different types of user interface that you can either show the front panel or close the front panel and bring it into things. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So a bit of LabVIEW. So the launch. So this is basically how you're basically sending out or launching or dynamically spawning your different screens. So you have in your manager your screen. You have different screens that are available. You actually specify a monitor, and this leads back to what I was talking about before in terms of having multiple monitors. So very high level, you specify which monitor that thing is going to be based on. And then you are doing a launch, and that goes back to that start asynchronous call. All you're doing is basically launching something that is running in wherever you want to imagine it, if you like, on your PC, and then it's just a loop that's doing something. It's just not, as you imagine, statically on your VI. And then we just take in, so this green wire, for all intents and purposes, is your queue reference. So these are queue references to all of the screens you've just launched. So obviously they're in an array for you to index if you need. So this is a little bit more complex, but quite simple in principle. So this is changing or changing statically those screens. So you've launched all of them, and you've loaded one in. So what we're doing is we're specifying an index based on a control. We check the index against those. You have, again, that panel. So your own individual panel that you're visual within. And you are removing the VI, checking that that screen still exists, so it's still valid, its queue is still valid, and then placing that screen into your current screen, and then telling that screen, so telling the screen that you've launched to insert itself into your panel. So it's basically handling its own removal or addition to that thing. So that's just sending a nested request as soon as you've done that, basically to that launched one. And then the other thing that I quite quickly do is, once you've done the insert panel, is we do a resize, just so that you send it a fresh idea of what the size it is and whether it should change what it can visually be. That applies quite nicely to other things as well. Okay. And then so within your nested, or within your thing that you've just told to be inserted into the panel, you have some code that basically removes whatever's in the subpanel, so that within that reference, and then make sure it's closed, and then inserts itself into that subpanel. So you basically get it show itself within that subpanel. So you have the actual thing itself deciding whether it should be placed within it. I've seen other ways doing it, and I was determined not to tout other people's presentations, but I know there is a good presentation by Tom McQuillan from UK Tag, which talks about this in more detail and how to go about doing it with panes and screens and that sort of thing, which I'm sure he won't mind me pointing to his YouTube channel. So instead of going into that in loads of detail, I wanted to just kind of show you adding a screen and how easy it is, given that I've kind of put this together, and this is where it doesn't work, and I can't actually show you, but I will escape. So the framework that you can see when I launch, so if I quickly launch that again and then move it to the other screen, if I show you that. So the framework that I'm going to modify essentially this framework here. So this top level around the outside, so that I can change between different amounts of screens. So I call it the framework. It's a framework class, and if I go into the core, so this is where you can see it. It's in a different color, so I can change those dynamically. But this is where we're going to kind of modify things. So I have at the top here is just a transparent cluster, if you like. So I'm going to basically right-click and open that type def and modify it. I'm just going to put in a Boolean and then call that demo. So it's probably risky changing code at runtime as I'm doing the demo, but we'll see how we go on. So give that a close, save it, it changes it. It looks a bit rubbish, so I'm going to make it see-through. I'll do that. And then make it a little bit neater. Quickly do that. Okay, so now we've got an extra button. So now we need that to correspond to a different screen. One thing I don't want to forget before I do is that I do have put in a demo conditional disable, which will come in more clear in a minute. Because the way in which I sort the top so I can disable things, I need that to slightly be changed. So I save that, and then I can change the amount of screens that I have in here. So I have in here a chart, which basically is just a waveform chart that is shown on the screen, and it's set to resize with it. That's all it is. So it's a widget, if you like. I'm just basically adding that to my array, so that I now have the 4 different screens. I save that, give it a close, and then when I launch this up, fingers crossed, I now have the ability to swap between different screens and also my demo screen. So that was basically 2 different changes, and all it took was basically adding something in to something that I've developed and I can reuse, just to add in a screen as we go. And that's just so that each screen is then an object that you can change and add in a core or a message handler for. Okay, is there any questions on that?
So Matt, is this the sub panel is the bit that graph's in now, right?
Yeah, so if you what I've done with the demo as well is that I've basically made all the splitters black, or some of the splitters black as many as I could. So you can see that sub panel for this one sits within there. If I go to the other one, this whole screen now sits within the same sub panel, and then within that screen I then have more sub panels. So it's a nested layer of complexity, which looks horrible on disk, but it's quite effective in how it works.
Yeah, nice one.
And then you can see that I go into this, but there's small splitters in there as well. So that was just a small change.
Sorry, Matt.
Yep.
So you added the demo control to the application.
Yep.
Could you go into, I guess, how you're handling that, I guess, event? So when you trigger that control, I maybe I missed. I didn't see you
Sorry, yeah. So
change anything there. So
what I'm doing is I have so you can see that, right? Still, yep. So I just have an event which handles. So that's a cluster. So it
okay,
handles the cluster, and then it takes the cluster itself, and then XORs it so that you can have it so it changes between the two.
okay,
XORs them together, changes it into an array, and then searches that array for wherever it was true. And that gives you an index of your screen that you want, and then that is fed back into my change screen, where it basically can select which index, which screen to then show into the subpanel.
okay.
So it links that array. So the only thing that really matters then is that the order in which I place those screens in that array that I showed you in here. So if I go back to here, the screens, I could modify the order of these arrays, so that I have that one there and that one there, and you can run it. And although this, you'll probably have to take my word for it on this one, but
That's very clear now.
and then you could change it, and this one then shows the waveform chart, because it's just a simple index of that thing. You could, I guess, if you name these, you could use the names to load different classes and things like that. But I strayed away from that for simplicity, if I'm honest.
Great, thank you.
No worries. Okay, jump back in. So the next thing I want to move on to is something I've used in order to get the kind of the end displays, is the use of a model view controller. So I don't know if people have tried to Google this, but you get something that looks like this in terms of a picture, and then about 1,000 different definitions of how to do it, and then 1,000 different definitions of how to do it LabVIEW. 1,000 is probably being quite generous, but you know. And I don't know if people have used these before, and how they've gone about doing them. But I find it quite useful in that I can have a central point in which I can separate the data away from any user interface that I have. So your model, in this case, or in an actual term, it defines your data structure. So think of it like I don't know, your type def control in a QMH, and then you have your controller and view, which is the state machine, if you like, that can change your view, which is your event structure. The ability to do this means that you can have one place where your data is, and then you have multiple different interfaces. They don't even have to be the same interface that could interact with the same data. So I launched two different interfaces there, which I can launch two interfaces which are the same, but you could have launched completely two separate ones, and then they interface in slightly different ways. Maybe one, it just, you can't do the configuration or anything like that. I find this was a really powerful tool. I don't know if anyone has used one, and if they give feedback on what they thought about it. There is one really good, if you Google MVC for LabVIEW, there is a really good representation of this with, which also uses, goes from like the QMH all the way to using the command pattern. So using like the things that are used in Active Framework, which is quite a nice leading point, and it shows a really nice interface. I've taken it a little bit further in terms of how I've used the model, so that I could have the data in a state machine. So I just have a very simple state machine leading back to the QMH that has the model, the data, and then I have my view and controller separated into a separate QMH, if you like, and then that model talks to that controller and that view, and those controller and view can talk between them. And the way I like to think about it is that if you had, say, you had a sequence that you needed to run through in order to get a set of data which is applicable for your commissioning, you then have one place where you can save that data, which is your model, but your controller applies and allows you to basically go through that sequence with your user interface. Did somebody want to say something there? Sorry. No, just anyways, fine. So model, we remove the kind of the event loop. So I have, again, going back to that actor side of things, I have a class that is my model, and then your view, which is user interaction and presentation. So sending user events up to visualize it, sending references down into your controller to visualize it in that way, or basically taking the user inputs and doing things with them. So separating out those loops I find quite useful, so you know things where they're going on. And then your controller, which is the message handling loops, or your control logic for your user interface. So any questions on that? I mean, there's every chance I've interpreted model view completely wrong, and somebody has a completely different idea about it. But that's my interpretation of it, and that's how I kind of use it as I've gone through it. So this is what I was talking about, and I think Neil asked about and the different views as well. And this is, I just wanted to quickly show you a configuration file, and I have basically the ability to go to a config file, any file, and actually I just set from in here how many screens I have. I think I can also do it from inside the configuration in the application, or maybe I didn't put that in, I can't remember at the moment. Just in any file, just showing up, and you can change basically based on the amount of monitors that you have, whether it's 1, 2, and how many it wants to launch. You can even put 5 in, and it will try find 5 and tell you haven't got them. But I will just put 2 in, and in exactly the same way, I just launched exactly the same application. And you're going to only see 1, unfortunately, but hopefully I can bring them both across. And I then have 1 on the screen that you can see, and then I have another one here that's doing exactly the same thing. And one thing worth noting is that with my individual configurable layouts is that I also have the ability to have different layouts per screen. So if it's on the top of a machine, on the bottom of the machine, you can only view, you could see like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you could also see, I don't know, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever on the bottom. So having that ability to configure your layout was quite powerful and time consuming to get my head around, but it's quite a useful tool. And I don't know if anybody's kind of gone about doing that in a different way, or had that idea, or done anything like that.
I think you can actually read the number of connected monitors via X controls, I think, for a device. If you put in another monitor, it then automatically will tell you how many it's got. You can get that information from Windows. Okay, that's cool. You definitely can from Linux real time. If you've got 2 monitors plugged into a Linux compact Rio, you can have it dynamically tell you how many monitors you've got. So I think you can do that. Yeah, no,
there are. Sorry, let me see if I can find. So I am using the ability to find monitors within it. Let me. Sorry, I'll try and find if I've put these in. I use Bookmark Manager for a lot of things, and I think everyone should if you don't already. So I don't know if this is what you were referring to, but I detect the amount of monitors that are available and then reference my amount of screens against those, and then just take the maximum in to make sure that I can do
yeah, it's pretty much what I was talking about.
Yeah, so that's all I'm doing. I'm double checking. It's just so that you could have. I mean, actually, I'd probably in the field only wouldn't tell anybody about changing it. But I don't know if you've ever done something which keeps spawning things when you're trying to test it. It's a pain. So I kind of set it as 1 and did it that way. And then when you're doing it, you also specify which monitor it's on, just by an index from there.
Matt, what's in that cluster then against each monitor? Do you get any useful information on that?
Probably. There is bounds, things like that. I haven't used it, I'll be honest. I'm literally just used it for the size of it, just so that I can discover.
You can pull things like resolution and stuff like that as well, I think. Cool. But it's a bit sketchy because it depends on how Windows identified it in the first place. And then it gets really messed up. But the Windows custom scaling stuff that it does, so you do like 125%. That really messes with it when it says. But I had one the other day. It was like a 13-inch monitor, and it said it was an 125-inch 8K display or something like that.
Okay, got you.
Obviously, it wasn't like even remotely. So it's not ideal. I only use it the same way as how Matt's using it just now. Just identify number of monitors.
Size. And that's how. And then when it comes to the actual user interface, so how I'm actually selecting which monitor it's on, I mean, I'm not sure I needed to wrap these in any functions, but abstraction forever. But yeah, so I'm just taking in, so when I've passed it the monitor inside the user interface, it takes out which monitor it's in, it selects which monitor it's on, and then maximizes that as we go through, so that you know which one it's going on to. I don't have any need to reference them individually, but you could obviously, if you know which display they're on or which monitor, you can decide which one goes where as well. So any questions on that? Sorry.
I only have one. Do you ever have a situation where, I've certainly seen it before, where when the computer is rebooted, it sometimes identifies the monitors in the opposite way around from where they were before? I don't know if you've run into this before, but on Windows 10, it seems to be a bit of a pain that if the two monitors are not connected via the same type of cable, like if one's HDMI and one's DisplayPort or whatever, and they're going through extenders. Yeah, and then you get things on the wrong monitors where they should be, and then usually we find techs go in and they manually change the monitor around the other way from Windows, and then the next time it reboots, it goes back the other way what it was previously. I don't know if you've come across that before. I
haven't, but I was trying to think. We haven't had that problem. We've not heard it from people, and it would be a problem if I'm configuring them separately. But the only way I would probably go about fixing that is making sure that. Trying to think about it. I mean, from a LabVIEW level, it probably doesn't work. But
yeah, the only way we got around it is we had to change some stuff in Windows to make sure the one was always identified in the same place. It just
that's the only way I think I'd go about it.
Yeah.
No, I haven't come across that problem, but it's a good point, and I'll bear that in mind when they do. If someone comes back and says it doesn't work.
If you get the 6 monitors, then that'd be a real pain. Like if they're too easy, you can flip them.
Juggling monitors, 6. Yeah,
not ideal.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And to be honest, it's probably quicker to configure it how I kind of showed from within LabVIEW and change it that way. If obviously if depending on how your application depends on those monitors, it so happens that mine doesn't so much. You can only configure a small amount, but yeah, I can imagine it's kind of a problem to overcome.
Yeah, one just to keep an eye out for more than anything else.
Yeah. Cheers for that. So. Just moving on from that, so scalability, I don't know, well, the background looks awful, apologies. I don't know how people have found other ways of doing this, and I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because panes and splitters are quite well documented. And again, go back to that Tom McQuillan's video. That's quite a good video to kind of go over it. But basically, the idea is that you want to be able to kind of fit it to any screen. LabVIEW's kind of, or has been stuck in a little bit in the dark age in terms of how you resize them, and I know WebVIs are now a little bit better, but it's quite a difficult thing to do as well. It's from what I found anyway, it's a bit of a learning curve to kind of get there and also get it resizing it in a way that you want and centralize as well. So the options that I found, and people are more than happy to weigh in there about what ways you can do it, is panes and splitters. And that's kind of how I've gone about solving it. So they split the UI up. They make things look kind of a little bit more professional, I think, in as you go through it. You can make them invisible if you want them. You can resize regions in different ways. So going back to tab controls, you can resize or change everything or resize different parts of it, but it's quite difficult to get different parts to resize in different ways. You can separate out the origins, which is useful for things like centralizing things and moving things around on the front screen. You can have different configurations for different parts, so like the configurable layout that you saw, and also you can change different colors and have them change quite nicely between the different parts on your screen. So have different things and have different color layouts if you like. Wrong way. Drawbacks that I found is that it's the most infuriating thing in the world, and it's quite, now I've done a lot of it, it's quite something that I can do kind of second nature and kind of do by default, and it can be quite time consuming if you can kind of justify that time in your projects as you go through them. I don't know if anybody else has had any input on trying to use those and bugbears or benefits that they found from using them as well. This was a very short demo. I just wanted to quickly show you how I've done those, basically how mine is split up. And I did quickly, when I set it to demo in the project conditional disable earlier. So you can actually see on the screen There are some more here, but I didn't get around to doing those, I'll be honest. There are quite a few splitters used to separate different parts and keep them stationary. So as I kind of resize those, you can see that different parts do and don't scale, and I just click off it, and how they are basically static and not static, and different parts are changing in the ways that they resize. And you've got the center here that shows, you can see all the text is resizing and being kept central. If I bring those outwards, or sorry, larger, everything else is kind of scaling around those as well. The image is scaling as well. And I think it just makes it look that little bit nicer, and can make an application that's quite good into something that people are quite impressed with. And also, I find that a lot of people just assume that things should resize. I don't know if you've ever had people say, oh, can we have it full screen? And you're like, well no, it doesn't, sorry. And that's something that can be often a bit of a drawback, and LabVIEW itself doesn't inherently, I mean, it's still not great, to be honest, and there are things you have to watch out for, but it can be done. And this is another time that I use tabs quite heavily. So tabs are a good way to contain things. So I don't actually use any of the tabs, but I'll put, if I go to my settings screen, oh no, wrong one, I changed them, didn't I? For example, I have a control in the middle of the screen there, and you might not want to put those into a cluster, or you might have different things or different clusters, and you can then put those on a tab control and centralize that tab control as you go with it inside your pane, which is quite a nice solution to a problem, and just make that invisible. Okay. Cautious of time, so I don't want to go for too long.
Matt, if we go for like 5 more minutes, is that
yeah, that's fine.
good?
So configurable layout, this is kind of what I alluded to earlier, and you saw me change. You can change how it's dynamically visualizing things. You can separate out, you can get screen configurations, so you can have different visualize of different screens. You could use it for multi-purpose, so that's that container and widget side of things. And it's just a nice way to extend really that UI hierarchy of your UML and its functionality, so that you can have basically another utility, if you like, in your armory for it. And I basically put these all in a library that I can swap between projects and use them. And yeah, again, if anybody's had any configurable layouts, then that'd be a good idea, because I'm looking for different ways to do different things all the times as well. So just a brief overview of container and widgets. So you've got your types of managers. So you're launching of screens and insert panels. So it's doing the same thing. You're launching a specific amount of screens and specific panels. You can have 2 types. So I have 2 types of containers that basically are static or flexible. So you statically launch those things. So you always have the same screens visualized at the same time, or they're flexible. So you can actually change what screens are visualized. So for example, a container will have inside it another container, and another container which then has your screen. So if you only had 1 layer or 2 layers, you might want to change what VIs go inside them. And then you have, for example, here we have our different types of containers. So 2 verticals, 2 horizontals, which can make up 4 horizontals, and so on. And then you can have 3 horizontals, which can make 6 horizontals, that sort of thing, and so on. I've only made the ones that I needed, but you could extend that functionality. And then the widget is literally just going back to the UML. It's just a UI. It's very simplistic, and you can make it change and split in size and that sort of things as you go. This is a quick overview of the dynamic calculation. So basically, I'm reading in from a file, getting two arrays, making sure I don't have any zero padding, and then checking whether there are elements in those arrays from the file, and then making decisions about whether we have 2 vertical, maybe just 1 vertical. Sorry, not 1 vertical, 1 container, and then using those size as an address, so they're numbers, as an address to launch particular things. So this could be a factory pattern, which is used to launch different controls, different classes. I'm launching them statically because I'm lazy. And then from there, you look at those addresses, you then put those into your screens. So going back to how we launch screens, and we launch those in exactly the same way. So feeding back into that high level of launch, change screen, and insert panels. And you go from there really, and the containers add in those different screens, and you have the ability to kind of dynamically launch things, which can be quite powerful, and not really something you'd, well, not something I envisage you could do with LabVIEW probably a year ago anyway. So just for the sake of time, I will stop there. I can perhaps do this some other time, and how you localize things with control references, and how you get the different references and store those in a file in different languages. Won't go into that. But hopefully that's an idea of how I've done some things. I might be able to do them better, probably will be able to do them better. But I'd be happy for people to kind of send me emails about discussions, questions, but also discuss now, go through kind of perhaps in the break about what ways you've done them, and perhaps ways I could do them differently, and that sort of thing. And feel free to critique if you like. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers, Matt. Just checking whether there's any questions in the chat. I don't think there are. No. Yeah, thanks very much.
Brilliant.
Oh, hold on.